Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Scruffy Movies Podcast. I'm Zach Wallace.
And I'm John Crocker.
Today we have one that I'm very excited for. It's something that has kind of always piqued my interest ever since I was a kid, and that's going to be just like ancient Rome and Greece movies that started out as Crocker saying, hey, we should do one about Gladiator. And I was like, yeah, while we're at it, let's throw in 300, Clash of the Titans, Percy Jackson. So it's just going to be like an amalgamation of old-timey, like looking at Greek gods and Norse gods and Roman gods and stuff like that, and just kind of those movies that surround them in those era and the people that believed in that and that lived through that era and had all those interesting stories.
And I have to admit, this is one of my favorite, groupings of genres, I guess is the best way to put it, of all time. I mean, we've talked many, many times before on this podcast how like certain world creation and backgrounds and stories and politics and all of that are really what draw me to a lot of films and stuff nowadays. And I mean, all of that just comes baked in with your, Roman tales and Greek and Celtic and Egyptian and, even like back to like Apocalypto with the Mayans and all of that. I think we're sort of piling all of those into sort of one big podcast today. And I love it. I've always loved everything about these movies, every single one of them. Although there have been some terrible movies, I love the setting and the genre.
Yeah, that's I just love like the history behind a lot of this stuff too. Like we took a class in college that was like, I was a history minor in college, so it was like literally just like an ancient Rome and Greece history class, and it was actually really cool. The teacher was like really tough, and so me and my buddy took the class, and my buddy was one of those like, she won't call on me, I don't have to do the work type people. And so he just didn't really care, but I was interested. So I would like read the books and like read the stories and all this stuff. And so I did really well. And then she would call on him and he'd be like, and he's like, I hated that class. And I was like, that class was awesome. You just didn't do anything in it.
Yeah. Well, it's, it's like anything else. The amount there is to uncover with these stories. I mean, we're talking about an entire, like, more than generations of people and stories here. And most of them were passed down verbally. Some of them were written. So, you have to actually like dive in and peel back the layers. I mean, most any good story from that time and movie really nowadays as well, just come with so many layers to unpeel. I mean, that's one of sort of the things about it, is that you expect when you see a Roman movie or a Greek movie that you're going to get some of the gods intertwined, that you're going to deal heavily into politics, that you're going to deal with war and, life and death and all of that. And it really all kind of comes together. And that's before you even get into the actual story that your character is telling or that you're following,
Yeah. And that's a good segue into Gladiator, which I had just seen for the first time like a week ago. Was the first time I had ever seen Gladiator. I'd seen like bits and pieces here and there. I knew like some of the stuff from it just from growing up around it, because it was such a big part of the pop culture back when it came out. But I was a little kid when it came out, so I just wasn't very interested in seeing it when it first came out. And then everyone just kept talking to me about how good it was and how good it was and how good it was. And so finally I sat down and I watched it. And I got to say, I really loved like the action parts. I loved Russell Crowe's story. The one thing I didn't like about it, and this could have been helped too, because I didn't really start to dislike it until I felt like the movie was just going on into its third hour, which it is about 3 hours long. And so there just got to be a point where I was like, I don't care about Joaquin Phoenix and the political status of Rome. Get back to Russell Crowe fighting in the ring and like having to try to avenge his family, being this like lowly gladiator dude. Get back to that. I could care less about the political stuff of Rome right now. I came to Gladiator to watch Gladiator. And so I like the movie, but I think they could have cut out probably about 20 minutes of like the political stuff.
Blasphemy. Blasphemy. To me, that is one of the things that makes Gladiator one of the, I don't want to say like the last good epics that we ever got, but it truly was one of the last great epics. I mean, they've tried to recreate it many, many times since then with like Exodus and Kingdom of Heaven and everything else. But that, I mean, with Joaquin, like, I mean, that was the true revenge of the movie, right? Like you had Maximus, and he was getting revenge for his family. But the true revenge is when the emperor basically neglected passing the throne on to his son, onto Joaquin, and said it was going to Maximus. Like that right there to me is really like the most defining point in the entire movie, because without that, if he would have given it to like his right hand man, if he would have given the throne to his right hand man, then I doubt you would have seen Joaquin, I forget his name in the movie, it starts with a C, kill the emperor. I doubt you would have seen that, and I doubt you would have seen, you know, anything really play out like we saw throughout the rest of the movie, where you sort of eventually get them going head to head. I don't know. To me, that is what you experienced is the byproduct of being able to do actual TV shows now with like Game of Thrones, where you can sprinkle in the politics. But before that happened, before that was a big thing in the world of TV, these were the movies that you got, and you only had that amount of time to go through all of those politics and to get all of that out there on the table as well. So you were looking at it through a lens of today's standard. But back when this movie dropped, it was the bee's knees, and still to this day is one of my favorite movies of all time. Definitely like in the top 10. I don't know where, but I'm
not saying that I disliked the political stuff, but it just got to be a point where I logistically, story-wise, felt like, okay, this is the boiling point. Like, this is where stuff needs to start going down. And then it was like another 20 minutes of talking, and then stuff went down. So I'm not saying the movie would be totally unbased without it. That I totally agree with. I think that the movie wouldn't be half the story that it is without that political stuff in there. I'm just saying they could have cut it back like 20 minutes and still had the same point, but gotten to it a little bit faster. I just felt like it started to drag, like in the end of Act 2 going into Act 3. It just got to the point where I was like, okay, this is it. Let's fight. And then it was another 20 minutes of them talking, and I was like, all right, okay, I guess I'll wait then.
Well, you know, something I've always been told about this movie, and I don't know how true it is that when they went in to shoot it, all they had was Act 1 and Act 3. Like they literally had no idea what Act 2. They knew the beginning of the movie, where the big scene against the Germans and all of that, and then they knew how it was going to end in Rome and the Colosseum and everything else. But that middle ground, there was literally a few days of shooting where they just had no idea what they were going to shoot that day. And Ridley Scott and it's Russell Crowe, right?
Yes.
Yeah, those two, and I guess all their other writers and everybody else just kind of like hit the books and started throwing scripts together, because they literally didn't have scripts, and then would just go out and shoot things as linear as they possibly could. So it's weird that you see them going into a movie where they have Act 1 and Act 2, and then one of the biggest complaints is that, or they had Act 1 and Act 3, and one of the biggest complaints is that Act 2 drawn on for a little too long, and they had no idea what they were even going to do for it, and they wound up making it too much.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, that just goes to show you like how many movies and even like TV shows I watch, my brain has just like been ingrained with the 3-act structure. I'm like, okay, and it's going to build up to a climax, and okay, and there's a little bit of downtime, and now we resolve the climax. Like in my head, even though I'm not like even thinking about it. Like I wasn't sitting there watching Gladiator being like, okay, this is a long Act 2. I was just like, all right, it's dragging a little bit. But
I guarantee, if you were to have been as old as you are now, but when this movie came out, without being tinted by all of the TV shows and everything we've gotten over the past few years, I bet you would not have noticed that additional 20 minutes. I bet that would have seemed totally warranted in your mind, only because you had not yet had those future experiences.
I don't know. Maybe, I mean, even if I was as old as I am now when it came out, I'm sure I probably would have still seen as many movies as I have now. So I don't know. I think my main qualm is, like I was saying, just the 3-act structure is just like bred into my head. So I, even subconsciously, I can't watch anything without thinking about the 3-act structure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how awesome this movie looked. I mean, to me, it was sort of in that era. It was after CG had started coming into the fold pretty heavily. So this wasn't like one of those true transitionary movies like Jurassic Park or something like that was. But it was also one of those movies where they used a ton of like real extras, and they paid super close attention to the costuming and the armor and the weapons and the setting, and everything just was absolutely perfect in my mind. I mean, I'm no huge like historian on Greek and Roman weapons and all of that, but it felt really, really realistic as far as the setting goes. Now, I am fully aware that the story actually, like the actual emperor and the son, that story played out totally different in real life. Maximus never existed in real life. But as far as the setting goes, and even as far as showing like how heavily politics plays into everyday life and how, sort of centered the culture was around the gladiatorial games and all of that, I think they really nailed it. They hit it out of the park.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something that can be said about, just in my opinion, like any Ridley Scott movie. Like, say what you want to about the story of Ridley Scott movies, like Prometheus or Alien Covenant or any of those kind of movies. But man, does that guy, and I'm sure it's also a very close relationship with his cinematographer or director of photography or something, that guy can build an atmosphere like nobody else. Like Alien, I don't even know, for the first Alien, they probably had maybe like 300 feet of stage built for the spaceship, and it feels like you're on a gigantic ship. And he puts it so atmospheric and with like little to no music, and the costumes they wear. Like, we don't know what the equivalent of space truckers would look like, but when you watch Alien, you're like, yep, that's what they would look like.
Yep.
And it just like, if every movie he makes, Prometheus and all that stuff, I always recommend going to see Ridley Scott movies in like as big of a screen as you can, because whether you like the story or not, you're going to be treated to a beautiful movie experience for 2 hours.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this numerous times, but I'm a sucker for good movie props. And there are 2 helmets specifically from Gladiator that one day I will own, and that is the main helmet that Russell Crowe wears that kind of looks like it has sort of like the fangs that come down by his mouth. It's sort of the stereotypical his helmet. And then when you get the really clean looking badass guy that has the huge metal like tiger helmet with the actual face that flips down from underneath it, those 2 helmets I want in my collection one day. I mean, I loved it.
Really cool.
And you really don't get movies like, the one thing I'll always remember, I haven't seen Gladiator in years, like at least 5 years since the last time I saw the movie, but I always will remember him dragging his hand through sort of the grains in the beginning of the movie, and he does it again at the end of the movie. And, it was just so great. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. And sort of the voice of the gods, when he says a few really heart-wrenching things. And, I don't know. I loved it. It was great. Still top 10 movie.
I actually really liked the juxtaposition of the final fight between Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix, where Joaquin Phoenix was wearing like all white, and they really tried to like dress the gladiator arena up, and they put like rose petals around them and stuff. And Russell Crowe, of course, is wearing like this dirty robe, and he's already been stabbed at this point by Joaquin Phoenix. And so I just liked, especially when they would do the really high out, like the aerial shots, I thought it looked really cool just seeing these, because he had all of his men surrounded against him. So it was almost like it was like a bunch of circles. Like you saw the sand color. Well, you saw the arena, and then you saw the sand, then you saw the men, then you saw the roses, then you saw just in the middle pure white and then like pure just dark and dirtiness and grit, and the juxtaposition of who's good and who's evil versus how they want to be perceived can be seen just in a shot like that. Joaquin Phoenix wants to be perceived as good, but he's a terrible person, and all Russell Crowe wants to do is avenge his family, which to an audience member that has been following his story, of course he's the good person this entire time. So just seeing those two juxtaposed against that, I thought was really a really cool shot and like a really cool way to speak to an audience's subconscious without them really knowing what they were looking at without looking at it analytically.
Yeah, I mean, Joaquin in this movie is one of like the biggest bad guys of all time, and having already stabbed Maximus before that scene and really sort of coming to the culmination of his character and just being like super evil. But what you really get there and what really struck me with that scene is you hear throughout the movie that a gladiator not only has to be a good fighter, but you have to win the crowd. Like, you have to be a good showman. And his life is spared a few times by Joaquin because the audience wanted it that way. And then at the end of the movie, Maximus dies a hero. Spoilers, by the way, this movie is like 20 years old, so if you haven't seen it, sorry. But Maximus sort of goes out as a hero, already having been stabbed, like we mentioned. Joaquin goes down, and you get the feeling, it's sort of alluded to, that all of Rome will be saved, right, because of that. And then the crowd walks by their emperor and hoists up Maximus, and you sort of get that one final moment of when it came down to those two, Rome sort of went with the good guy, and he did win the crowd. And because of that, the day is saved kind of thing. So I don't know, there's a lot in this movie. It's totally one of those movies where you have to watch like 6 times. And I may or may not have watched it 6 times in a row, multiple times in my life, but you gotta, I just love it. I love how it all ties itself together. Everything comes back at some point or another. They really don't leave a whole lot up for question, except for maybe a little bit of the family and whatnot. But that last scene is probably one of the most like hard-hitting scenes of any movies of that time.
Oh yeah. It was rough to watch because the entire time I was like, oh, come on, man. It was like I always say, I'm not a big sports fan, but I can get like super pumped up about movies with kind of events like that where there's like a winner and a loser. I think that's one of the reasons why I like the Avengers so much. They just kind of seem like my team. And so that entire time, just under my breath, I was like, come on, man. And he would swing at him wildly or something, but he's dying. So he would just kind of swing wildly and miss or something. And I was like, no, come on, get up. And so I was like, and like the movie's 20 years old, whatever's come to pass has come to pass. And then an actual timeline is thousands of years gone by now, but I'm sitting in my house in 2019 rooting for Russell Crowe as if it's actually happening in front of me and I'm in the arena. So that's something to be said about the movie too. It really sucks you into the story.
Yeah, and you don't realize how like long ago and how most of humanity for the history of the world has lived in mostly like these time periods that we're talking about here. I mean, we talked about that 70s show Paradox last week. Yeah. And, I've always heard, and this may be, again, may be true, may not, but like we are just as far away from Cleopatra today as Cleopatra was from the creation of the Great Pyramids. Like they were just as old to her in her own time, really, as they feel to us, because you just can't fathom that length of time. And for a massive chunk of the history of the world, Rome controlled 30% of the Earth's population, all the way up from Europe down to Egypt, over to, the Asia where the Huns were and all of that. So, I mean, what we're talking about here in these settings truly are like, I mean, we have not yet surpassed living in modern life, the amount of time that they lived back then. So when we tell these stories, I think it hits something a little bit, a little bit of that monkey brain in us that sort of remembers through history what we've been through and the fight to survive and truly what it was like to war with swords and spears, but also have to actually grow your own food and hunt your own meat. And if you got diseased, you were dead, like no question. You know, it's kind of, there's something in the back of all of our brains that primal that I think these movies sort of turn on. It flicks that switch, and that's why a lot of us get interested.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think that that there is a lot of that kind of, I mean, even like kind of going back to the last statement of like, I was rooting for him and I wanted him to win. You know, that goes back to like the primal instinct of you follow the strongest person. And so, and I mean, back then it was like literally who is the strongest, but now it's kind of who takes the moral high ground, who do our beliefs follow more now that we've become more complicated as a humanity. So too have these emotions become complicated. And so it kind of talks back to that primal instinct thing of war and who's better and who has the more justified side and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it reminds you that politics is a game as old as time. You know, all that was still happening back then as well. One thing, just sort of like random fact that I happen to be aware of, is that back in Coliseum days, they would actually pit big, beefy, strong guys against like slender, agile, quick guys. And they would argue and bet on who would win. Is it the brawn or is it the speed? That was sort of a big, never-ending conversation back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that, I mean, even in Gladiator, they were getting the big guys and putting them with the little guys. But I mean, those guys weren't like just speed, they were just scrawny guys. And so they were like, get a bigger guy and put him with a scrawny guy and we'll see how they fight. But yeah, I mean, even in that movie, they were doing that kind of stuff.
You know, so talking about the best warriors, let's roll that right over into 300.
Let's do it. A movie that I enjoyed, and I might get a lot of flack for this, but 300 and even 300 Rise of an Empire, I enjoyed both more, I think, than Gladiator.
Yeah, I am infamously known for liking terrible movies, and the second 300 movie I love it. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great addition to the series. They obviously could not do a lot of the things that they did in the first 300 because that was a very particular story told about a very particular battle. And they really tried to broaden things out with the second one and maybe set up for the trilogy, which is, to my understanding, what it was meant to be. And they sort of leave you hanging with the threat of a big war at the end of the second one. So it bums me out when first off, when people talk bad about the second one because I liked it, but even more when people blame its failures on why we have not seen a third one, because I would just be giddy if they were to announce a actual third entry to wrap up the trilogy of 300. But I mean, let's face it, that first movie, the original 300, is just one of the greatest sort of stories in this genre and greatest movie representations of that story, even though it was actually kind of more based off of a novel than the actual Battle of Thermopylae. But I loved it. I thought it was great, as with most movies in this genre, this set of genres.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched the first 300 movie, I hadn't seen it because that was also kind of like off of my radar, just growing up and being more interested in like comedy and horror really than anything else. And so I thought the trailers looked good. I was like, wow, it looks interesting. Like it looks like a stylistically good movie, but I was like, I'll catch it, you know, like when it comes to Blockbuster or something like that. Like I'll rent it one day when I have nothing else to do. And so I actually saw Meet the Spartans first, which is the like making fun of the 300 movie. And I thought that movie was terrible. And so it kind of put a sour taste in my mouth for 300, even though it was just a parody movie of that. I was like, yeah, but I mean, like if you watch the first Scary Movie, it's making fun of it, but you've basically seen the story of Scream. Like they copy scene for scene a lot of stuff from Scream. Right. And so kind of the same dichotomy carried over. And I was like, well, I guess I've kind of seen 300 now. I mean, I'm sure there's not like Kung Fu Panda in it or like whatever it was, but like I just kind of, I didn't see it for a while. And then finally we were at a football game, and this high school I went to, we were actually called the Spartans. And so we had a foreign exchange student there, and he came to the game wearing like a big coat. And he was like, when it's halftime, follow me if you want to see something really cool. And we were like, all right. And so he walked over, and we were playing our rivals at the time in football. He walked over to their side during halftime, and we kind of all followed him. He ripped his coat off and was wearing a Spartan outfit from 300 and yelled, "This is Sparta!" and just started like running through their crowds screaming. And it was hilarious. And then he ended up getting booted out of the game and banned from coming to the football stadium for the rest of his high school career because they called it indecent exposure. And like the night after that, like the day after that, I was like, I gotta rent 300. I gotta see like that skit he did jazzed me up too much, and I gotta see what this is all about. So that's how I watched 300 for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, both of these movies that we've talked about so far, Gladiator and 300, definitely made their way into pop culture. I mean, the 300 was coming around like right as memes were coming around, and that whole like kicking, you know, the "This is Sparta" with the kicking motion found its way into more sort of daily life / meme than a lot of other movies at the time. And talking about indecent exposure, 300 was probably the poster child for like, we're just going to CG muscles and abs onto all these people, so maybe women will come to our movies and see a big action war movie. And it worked.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I didn't even know that the abs were like CGI'd and stuff. I just thought Meet the Spartans were making fun of like their real abs, and then it was like, oh no, they like airbrushed them on to make them more accentuated. And I was like, what? I had no idea.
And it was in that weird, it had that weird look about it. Like it was that weird CG that was almost cartoonish, but cartoonish on purpose, but it really sort of fit in with the look of the film. Like when you watch the movie, if you were to take a clip of it now, it would almost look like one of those just weird phases that CG went through, which did give way to like the Spartacus TV show, which also kind of doubled down on that awkward CG-esque look. But at the time, and for the movie as a whole, I think it worked out very well.
Yeah, I think so too. I think everything they kind of did with that movie, whether it was intentional or not, fit stylistically with what the movie was trying to achieve. And I mean, it launched Zack Snyder's career. They were like, oh, this was your first one? And I mean, it was like his first big one, but they were like, yeah, do this in other movies, do this style, but for everything else. And I think that's kind of where his career caught up with him.
Yeah, totally. And but you know, I mean, I think it still sort of stands on its own with like that style of CG. Maybe like the darkness and the being able to have one cohesive look and feel for a movie Zack Snyder is still great at, but I don't think anyone has ever really done that look and feel, that graphic style, the way 300 did it. And maybe the second 300 did it as well, but not quite as in your face.
Yeah, I think it was a little more subdued, trying to make it like its own movie in the second 300 more than the first 300. They just dove all in. And then the second, the guy was like, well, I mean, I want it to look the same because it's a sequel, but I want it to be mine. Because the second one was not directed by Zack Snyder. It was produced by him, but it was a different guy. And so I think kind of he wanted to put his twist on it as well.
Gotcha. I was unaware of that. But you know me, I don't really get too deep into who directs and who writes. I just see someone's name associated with it and assume they had everything to do with it.
Yeah, that's my big issue going through life, of having to explain to people that Tim Burton did not direct A Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yes, because I will totally get that fact wrong until the day I die, just because it's been drilled into my head.
Yeah, everyone's always like, oh yeah, the Tim Burton movie, The Nightmare Before Christmas. I was like, he only came up with the story for it. Other than that, nothing. And they were like, what, really? And I'm like, yes. It's my curse.
It's your curse. You know, I do just have to throw this out here at some point, and I think that right now is as good a time as any. I think that as far as Greek and Roman movies go, and we're talking about big epics, I'm just going to totally sidetrack and say oh, of course. What is
Maybe
that?
that wasn't such a good time to throw it
Maybe that
out.
wasn't such a good time. Well, I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Then we can do halftime because
Okay.
I want to say it really quick that I think Hercules, the Disney Hercules, is one of the most underrated like Greek movies of all time. Boom.
Oh, I 100% agree. I
Because
agree. Yes.
they actually do have a lot of the traditional deities obviously represented in Disney ways. But if you're paying close attention, there is a lot of little Easter eggs in that movie if you're sort of into that era and that genre that obviously the kids watching it would have just never noticed and glossed over, and you may not have noticed when you watched it a decade and a half ago.
Yeah, I agree. I love that Hercules movie, and that's probably one that made me, because that was one of the first big Disney movies that I remember getting like super into and watching a lot. So that might be kind of, at least in part, responsible for my love for this type of movie.
Totally. All right, halftime.
Okay, so that sound means it's halftime. Halftime is the part of the show where Crocker and I take a break in the conversation just to go over some of the more recent movie news or trailers we've seen, stuff we're excited for. And recently we've been doing digital code giveaways during this time. This week is no different. And this week we're going to be giving away a code for a movie with somebody who is a gladiator in their own right in their movie. And that's going to be Marvel Studios' Black Panther, also nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars tonight. So it's kind of a full circle digital code giveaway. So we'll be giving away Black Panther. All you got to do if you want to win that free digital code is comment the code word forever below, or direct message me at Scruffy Movies on Instagram. Once again, the code word is forever. You just need to comment that on the YouTube video below or direct message me on Instagram, and you'll be entered to win a free digital copy of Black Panther.
Bam. All right. So should I start off some interesting things I've seen this week?
Yeah, go for it, because I'm gonna wrap us up, and if it's not on your list, with one of the weirdest things I saw this week. I'm gonna wrap us up with that. So I want you to start, and hopefully it's not on your list.
So I've seen a lot of trailers this week that I want to mention because over the past like month or so, it's kind of been dry with trailers, which I think happens sort of at the turn of the new year every year. But I've seen some pretty good ones. I want to start out with Captive State. Have you seen the trailer for that yet?
No, I haven't. Who's in that?
John Goodman is the only one that I really recognized. There's probably some other decently known folks in it, but John Goodman definitely was the sort of top of the list actor. And it's very much of what I can tell, like a post-apocalyptic movie, but with an alien twist. And it seems from what the trailer is inferring that there'll be some type of revolution against the aliens that like occupied Earth X amount of time ago. So it's very sort of dark, very post-apocalyptic, and anything with John Goodman, I'm game for. Especially, I mean, at first when I saw John Goodman and I saw sort of the big unseen aliens in the background, I expected it to almost be another Cloverfield trailer, like for some sort of a Cloverfield sequel, but it seems to be its own IP.
Yeah, I've seen the poster for that in movie theaters before, and I remember not knowing what it was and always thinking to myself, I need to look that up. That looks interesting, but I never have.
Next, I have a couple of Westerns, which I'm a big sucker for. The first is going to be The Kid, which is all about Billy the Kid, and it stars Chris Pratt was probably the biggest name I saw in that film, a couple others, but that looks like it's going to be awesome. Tells the story of Billy the Kid as far as I can tell. The Highwaymen is the next one. This is going to be a Netflix movie, and it's all about the Texas Rangers that chase Bonnie and Clyde. And what got me really excited is that it appears those two Texas Rangers are going to be Kevin Costner and Woody Harrelson. And then Kathy Bates is in there as well, and I love her.
That's it?
No.
Oh.
No. After that, I've got Rocket Man. which is, as far as I can tell, very much of the same way, but Bohemian Rhapsody sort of told the story of Freddie Mercury. We've got Rocket Man sort of telling the story of Elton John in a Hollywoodized sort of biopic, and I always dig those. I like his music, so I'm certainly going to check that out. And then last but not least is Dragged Across Concrete, or maybe it was Dragged Across the Concrete, but I'm pretty sure it's just Dragged Across Concrete, and that's starring Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn in sort of a buddy cop drama. And obviously, if it's got Vince Vaughn, I expect it to have a lot of comedy sprinkled in. Now that's it.
Okay. That I haven't heard of, or at least haven't seen the trailer for a good majority of those. So that's why I always feel like I have my kind of finger on the pulse of like big budget superhero movies or like comedies or horror movies or just like weird stuff. And then you always got it on like the trailers that come out, but not a lot of news sites report on them. So I maybe don't see them. And then you come through and you're like, oh yeah, I just left YouTube playing, saw this really cool trailer. It's for this movie coming out soon. You should check it out. And I'm like, all right, yeah, sweet.
Most of the ones that make my list week to week are trailers that popped up when I was watching a YouTube movie and it was the ad they delivered to me. And then I'll say, you know what? I haven't seen this trailer yet. I know I'm going to have to mention some trailers here in a few days. So let's see if this one looks any good.
Yeah, I have seen the poster for Captive State. I need to watch that trailer. And then The Highwayman also looks extremely promising.
Yes.
So for my halftime this week, first off, I believe on Friday, we got our first trailer for, it's called Pennywise. And it's going to be a documentary about the making of the 1990 miniseries of Stephen King's It. And like anybody who was born in that era, you become kind of almost obsessed with it, or you at least know who it is. It probably scarred you. You remember the video cover. So just being able to kind of sit down with the cast and crew of it and talk about the making and then kind of how it appropriated throughout culture and kind of dug into the skin of all the kids who were born around that era, I think is going to be a really interesting documentary to see. And I think it's probably also going to dive into the book and the new movies and stuff like that. So just overall, I'm really excited for that documentary. It seems extremely interesting. Second on my list, A Quiet Place 2 was just announced to start shooting this summer for a 2021 release date. John Krasinski has written the script and is coming back to direct, and he is, of course, who wrote and directed the first movie, and Emily Blunt is set to return to star in it, and so I'm very excited about that. The first Quiet Place took me really by surprise. I remember when they announced, kind of along the same grade of when they announced Jordan Peele's horror movie Get Out, I was like, Jordan Peele, we'll see how that turns out. And then it blew me away. So did the same thing with Quiet Place, where they were like, oh, John Krasinski made a horror movie. And I was like, oh, great. Yeah, Jim from The Office. We'll see how that goes. And then it was incredible. So I'm very excited for that. The Oscars, as I mentioned before tonight, there's some weird stuff going on with this year's Oscars, weird categories, weird nominations and stuff. But as a movie fan, I feel kind of obligated to watch them. So I'm going to have to check it out and see. We're also rumored to perhaps be getting a new Avengers Endgame trailer at some point during the Oscars. So that would be awesome if that did happen. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. Another rumor that is kind of spun out of the mill is that perhaps after the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover that's going to be happening next year on the Arrowverse, it's rumored that Arrow and Legends might be finished after next season, which is really sad because I like both of those shows. Arrow has had an extremely good season this year, and Legends is just kind of always top of its class for me because it's about weirder stuff and sidekicks and bad guys, and that's just kind of my MO when it comes to superhero stuff and what I like the most. But I'm kind of sad that if that rumor ends up being true, that those might be ending soon. And then finally, the weird thing that I promised. So I'm sure you've seen the KFC commercials where they have just like actors coming in and doing and being like the Colonel, right?
Yep.
Okay, so they just announced, and I thought it was fake at first, but it's totally true. RoboCop is going to be the new Colonel for the KFC commercials. And they have pictures out there, and it's literally RoboCop, but wearing like the Colonel's tie, and he has like a big wig on, and he has a mustache and glasses. And it's like, we had to enlist RoboCop to protect our secret recipe of 12 herbs and spices or something like that. So RoboCop as the Colonel is the new spokesperson for KFC.
That is very weird, and I was completely unprepared to hear that news.
When I read it, I was like, that's a joke. And nope, it's true. The KFC like marketing director was like, oh yeah, and it's gonna be really cool, and we're so excited. And like Peter Weller came back to voice RoboCop, who played RoboCop in the original. Like they couldn't get him in RoboCop 3, but they got him for KFC commercials. And so it's just, I just want to be a fly on the wall in the room where they're like, all right, yeah, so we've done Reba McEntire. We've done a lot of like old SNL guys. Who are we looking at next? Who do we think would be a good Colonel? And somebody's like, RoboCop. And they're like, what did you just say? I just want to see how the conversation went when RoboCop was pitched to be the new KFC spokesperson.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm going to have to see those play out.
It's so weird. They have some of the commercials are like up on YouTube now. You'll have to check them out.
Yeah.
It's strange. It's weird.
That is very strange. So let me ask you this. Is trailer sort of first looks and releases a thing that they do at the Oscars? I have to admit, I don't watch any award shows.
I think it's just something that, especially because I think they're on ABC this year, which is, of course, owned by Disney. And so they're just kind of looking at any place they have with where a lot of people could be tuning in to watch the commercials. So, I mean, of course, like the Super Bowl is number one because everybody tunes in to watch the Super Bowl. And then after that, it's just kind of like some more of the bigger events of the year. It's like bigger sporting events and stuff like that. And then for more movie people, because kind of everyone who's a big movie fan usually tunes in to watch the Oscars. And so they're just trying to kind of look for an audience. I don't know if it's really like necessarily like, oh yeah, it's expected. You know, there's always like some really cool trailers, but I think it's just kind of Disney looking for an audience of people who they think would be interested in these movies. And especially because I haven't heard anything from the initial story, but apparently after Kevin Hart said, I'm not going to go back to the Oscars. I quit. And so I quit. I'm done. They were trying to get as many of the Avengers as possible to be kind of like presenters / hosts almost for the show. So like every Avenger would have like just a little different thing introing the next category or award, and then having a lot of Avengers be presenters for the night as well. So it would be a good kind of Avengers filled night if that's the way it went to release the new in-game trailer. I don't know if that's the way it ended up going or not.
Weird. So you're thinking that the trailer would be like an actual commercial?
Yeah, maybe just like a TV spot, and then kind of like, all right, here's 20 seconds of footage you've already seen, and here's 10 seconds of new footage. And of course, that would make everybody freak out. I would freak out about it because I'd be like, oh my God, 10 seconds of new footage. Look, this is what I think about this, and this.
Gotcha. So I don't want to take halftime here and extend it any longer than we need to, but I also have to ask, why in the world would they be canceling the DC shows? I mean, it makes sense with Marvel because Disney's about to have Disney Plus, but why Arrow and why Legends? Why are they going bye-bye?
I think they're just some of the lowest rated. Flash has always been the highest rated. And I think Legends is their lowest rated either way, which is sad because I think it's one of the better DC shows out there, one of the better comic book shows out there. And I just think that people just aren't really tuning into Legends as much. So it's kind of already their least priority show. And then Arrow, I think that Stephen Amell, I have seen a couple interviews with him and stuff. And he's like, like it feels like we're starting to wrap up. And he was on Michael Rosenbaum's podcast, which I listened to, who of course played Lex Luthor in Smallville. And they started talking about how Michael Rosenbaum only played Lex Luthor for 7 years. And he's like, and then, I got to the end of the story. I was like, I've done everything I can with Lex. I can't do anything with Lex anymore. So there was no reason for me to be on the show. My character would just be terrible. And it would it would hurt the show more if I was on it than if I left. And Stephen Amell seemed to kind of agree with that. And he was like, yeah, he's like, I've always said, like, he had a contract that would be up after like season 8 or something like that, which is this next season. And so I think he said a lot about just kind of like playing it by ear and seeing how he feels about it. So I think he just might be kind of getting tired of playing that character and being known for that character, and maybe wants to explore like some different stuff in his career.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. But I think it's weird that virtually any other show that's highly successful will come up with something awesome to do. Like, you saying that, oh, my character's played out seems like a weak excuse, especially when the universe as a whole is referred to as the Arrowverse.
Yeah, I mean, that's the show that started it. So it's going to be weird to see. I think maybe he'll still pop up kind of like in an Iron Man capacity if they do the crossovers. They keep going with like Flash and Supergirl or whatever new shows they bring to the network. I feel like we could still see some Green Arrow like cameos from people, but I don't know if it's going to be a show for very much longer.
Awesome. Well, it's about that time to roll over into the quick pitch, don't you think? Or
should
we get back to, is there anything you wanted to mention before we do that?
I was going to talk about the Scorpion Kings, but as we were talking about stuff, I realized that the Scorpion King movies aren't really good movies. I think I just liked them because The Rock was in the first one.
There's a lot of those. They're not terrible.
There's 5.
They're pretty bad, but
There's
the first
5.
couple aren't bad. The only thing I really wanted to mention, and I feel like it would be remiss if we didn't at least mention this, talking so much about Gladiator and the Coliseum, is that, isn't it weird that was really what they had before movies? I mean, you had Coliseums and you had plays. And plays, I don't think, actually came around until Shakespearean times. So in the Roman days, like, it was very much like we go to the theater with our friends to catch the newest movie. They would go watch the newest Gladiator take down the newest wild beast that they had brought back from Africa. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to mention that because I think that's kind of a crazy little parallel to the world we live in now.
Yeah, I agree. It's weird. I was actually thinking about that, because they had a line with the son in Gladiator where Russell Crowe's like, he lets you watch the games? And he's like, well, yeah, he says it helps build character. And I was like, that is kind of weird. I mean, this was just their entertainment, and just to be like, well, kids can't watch this. It's people dying and killing each other. And then everyone, like, when Russell Crowe had the Gladiator who had the cool helmet that you want, he was down at the end and he had the sword up to him, and everyone was like, kill, kill, kill. And it's crazy to think that there was just times where you would just like root for people's deaths for entertainment purposes because you had nothing else to do on like a Saturday.
Yeah. Well, and death back then was viewed totally different than it is today.
That's true too. That's true as well. If you died like as an honorable gladiator in the ring, like, people didn't feel bad for Russell Crowe. They felt bad that he was dead, but they're like, now you're with your family. And like, I don't think there was many tears shed for Russell Crowe passing away in Gladiator. I think it was like, you've completed your purpose and you've died a gladiator in the ring. The gods are going to look down glorious upon you. You're back with your family. So I don't think there was a lot of like, oh no, what are we going to do now?
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right. Quick pitch?
Yeah, let's do quick pitch. I'm ready for it.
All right. Well, you go first.
Okay. So since we're kind of talking, I know that Gladiator has been our main point of contention through kind of this entire episode, but we've also kind of bridged out and just started talking about all these other things. The number one movie I want to see made kind of in this era with some more of the same themes is a God of War movie. Like, it's such a good video game franchise, and it's so like stylistically ready for a movie. The latest game that just came out last year already felt like a movie. And playing through that, you always feel such a sense of like story and scope. And I mean, it's just this lowly guy who his family dies. And so he's like, I'm tired of the gods telling us how we can and can't live our lives. I'm done with it. And so he's just a soldier. He's a good soldier, but he's just like, I'm going to go kill him. and he just starts like killing gods. And I think that movie really lends itself especially to our time now, even if it's not a movie. Maybe let's say it's a Netflix series or something like that, and so they can kind of like really dive deep into the backgrounds of the gods and like the backgrounds of stories and kind of give more characterization to people instead of just in like a big 2.5 hour action-packed movie. But I think that is just so like ready to go for a movie. And I know video game movies are kind of notorious for not being the best, but I think if done right, God of War could be a really, really, really good movie and a good franchise.
I have to admit, it's the first time you said that just a moment ago, my mind immediately went to Lord of War, which is a Nicolas Cage movie that's actually kind of awesome. But yes, God of War. Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, the God of War franchise goes back a long way. Like, there's a lot of story to tell there before the most recent game. So yeah, I'm totally with that. But like you said, they have to break the mold of video game movies and video game shows that typically suck. And I would like to see it as a movie. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, I want to see more big epic movies than we're getting now. I love the TV shows and Game of Thrones and everything else, and you have all the liberties you get to take with the sheer amount of time you have to play with. But I want to see more big epic movies.
Yeah, and I think God of War is ready for that. And I think kind of my qualms about Gladiator, which was, wow, there's a lot of cool action, but kind of there was a little more political stuff than I was expecting. I feel like almost God of War might stray the line the other way, and it might have me be like, well, there was a lot of action, there was a lot of like fighting. I wish it maybe just would have had a little bit more story.
Totally.
So it has to be like the right filmmakers, the right people behind it. But I think it's ready for a movie, and I think that the movie could be really good if it was done right.
I love it. I think it's a great idea.
What do you got?
So for me, I really just want to see a proper, like, true Gladiator, Braveheart style, a proper Odyssey, and a proper Iliad and Odyssey.
Yeah.
But I think that there's no real way to do either one of those in one standalone movie. It's impossible. It's too much to tell. So at a minimum, and again, I'm going against TV here, at a minimum, you're looking at a trilogy for each. Probably, I mean, honestly, for the Odyssey, you could make a standalone movie for each and every one of the challenges and the adventures. I mean, the Cyclops, the Sirens, all of that. I think that there's so much to tell there that a trilogy would be the minimum amount of room you could give yourself. But truthfully, a much longer running series over a long period of time would really be the way I wanted to see it portrayed. The Iliad, I'm not quite as excited about as the Odyssey. And there have been attempts at this many, many times over the years. I mean, we've gotten, I think, Odysseus. There was some Odysseus movie they made in the past 5 or 10 years, and it was like terrible. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is literally just a reskinning of the Odyssey, and they did a great job. But I want to see a true epic style, like, story of Odysseus in the Odyssey, and then also all of the things that happen in the Iliad, which we've seen loads and loads of other little movies sort of pick and choose from. And I think that if that happened, because those are sort of the basics off of which a lot of other stories and mythos has been created, if they were able to really knock it out of the park and truly hit it as hard as like Braveheart and 300 and Gladiator hit pop culture at that time, that it could cause a little bit of the resurgence in huge epics being made. Because up until Gladiator, it was like epics were kind of dead, and then ever since then, the ones that have been made have kind of sucked. But like way back in the day, with like the original Spartacus and Ben-Hur and even like Zulu and all of those, like, that's the kind of movie I want to come back around.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking modern movie studio language by pitching a trilogy instead of just a single movie.
Yeah, for real.
You're
You don't understand. It has to be a trilogy.
You're perking ears up, and they're like, "Oh, we would have no problem with that." They make 2 movies out of movies that should just be 1. You're telling me we get to make 3 movies out of 1 book? We're in.
Yeah, totally.
All right, everybody. Well, I guess that about wraps us up for this episode of the Scruffy Movies Podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed. I know this one's been I don't want to say historical, but I guess we're talking more about historical stuff, so maybe historical. But we hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you got something from it. Maybe you agree with me about Gladiator. Maybe you agree with Crocker. But at least you got to see us bridging even more out into the world of movies and television shows before we suck it right back in next week for another Marvel podcast.
That's right.
So we're really excited for that one. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Once again, if you want to win the free digital copy of Black Panther, all you got to do is comment the code word forever below or direct message me on Instagram at Scruffy Movies. Again, the code word is forever, and you'll be entered to win a free digital copy of Black Panther. Please follow us on Instagram at Scruffy Movies.
And Crockalicious.
Thank you all for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.
Bye.